Look at the raw numbers from Hamilton's last 3 race weekends before Monza, and a pattern emerges. At Spa, 2 qualifying exits before Q3, one in the sprint, one in the Grand Prix, set him back before he even lined up. He recovered to 7th, but the damage had already been done. Hungary told a similar tale, knocked out in Q2, a scruffy off-track moment while chasing Verstappen, and a lap down at the flag. By the summer break, Hamilton wasn't just struggling with Ferrari's machinery, he was struggling with himself. What makes Zandvoort different is that it stripped away the usual excuses. No questionable strategy call, no power unit limitation, just driver against circuit, on a reconnaissance lap, where the margins should have been routine. Instead, Hamilton crossed the painted line, the car snapped, and the crash was instant. It wasn't high-speed drama, it was high-profile carelessness. Add the yellow flag infringement that followed, and suddenly Monza began with a self-inflicted 5-place penalty. This is where Ralf Schumacher's criticism finds traction. A driver with more than 300 starts and 7 titles doesn't spin twice in a weekend and miss a double yellow. Not when Ferrari's faithful measure every detail. Not when Charles Leclerc in the same car stands 42 points ahead in the standings. Ferrari's leadership will privately forgive one crash. They won't forgive a trend. Yet Hamilton's Monza recovery drive complicates the narrative. 5th in qualifying, 10th on the grid, and 6th at the flag. That's not failure. That's resilience. The question is whether resilience is enough when the errors keep mounting. Because for Ferrari, results aren't measured in optics, they're measured in podiums. And with 8 rounds left, Hamilton has none. The real danger isn't that Hamilton is slower than Leclerc. It's that the Tifosi may start to believe he's less reliable. And in Italy, once that perception hardens, even a legend's margin for error disappears. But here's the problem that Ferrari's pit wall can't ignore. Hamilton insists he could have taken 5th at Monza with a sharper strategy call. And that tension, driver error versus team error, sets the stage for a political storm no dataset can settle. Hamilton's comments after Monza cut through the usual diplomatic haze. He said plainly, "We could have undercut George Russell. We missed that opportunity." On paper, he isn't wrong. By lap 30, Hamilton trailed Russell by 1.5 seconds. Ferrari had the window, the tyre delta, and the track position potential. Yet the call never came. Russell stayed ahead, Hamilton stayed 6th, and the question hung in the Monza paddock. Was this Ferrari being cautious, or Ferrari showing preference? Here's why that matters. Charles Leclerc finished ahead, banked the points, and extended his advantage over Hamilton to 42. That gap is not just numerical, it's political capital. Within Ferrari, every point Leclerc secures makes him the safer bet, the driver who deserves priority when strategy calls split. For Hamilton, whose move to Maranello was sold as a partnership of equals, that narrative is dangerous. Add the Tifosi factor, and the stakes sharpen. Ferrari fans don't just want results. They demand them with a cultural intensity no other team faces. They'll tolerate machinery that isn't fastest. They'll even forgive conservative strategy, but they will not forgive unforced driver errors layered on top of missed opportunities. Each crash, each penalty, each complaint about strategy risks sounding like an excuse, and excuses in red are received like betrayal. The irony is brutal. Hamilton joined Ferrari to escape Mercedes' suffocating corporate weight and to rediscover joy in racing. Yet at Monza, every microphone carried his frustration. Every camera angle, his body language. Instead of liberation, Hamilton looks like a man wrestling both the stopwatch and the politics of his new team. This tension, driver-blaming strategy looking at driver mistakes, creates a feedback loop that Ferrari knows too well. History at Maranello is littered with partnerships that fractured under less pressure. The Tifosi can turn heroes into villains in a single weekend. And if Hamilton doesn't break this cycle soon, Ferrari may quietly decide that their 42-point man deserves all the backing. Which raises the crucial question, does Hamilton still control his destiny inside Ferrari, or has Monza marked the moment where Leclerc became the undisputed number 1? Few drivers in Formula One are as brutally honest about themselves as Lewis Hamilton. After Hungary, he called himself useless, absolutely useless, and even went so far as to suggest Ferrari might need to change driver. For a 7-time champion, those words weren't just self-criticism, they were psychological tremors. Champions rarely invite doubt into the room. Hamilton practically opened the door and set a place at the table. Sports psychologists talk about performance self-talk, the inner dialogue that shapes reflexes under pressure. At Mercedes, Hamilton's self-talk was usually combative. Complaints about tyres, radio battles with Bono, but always framed with defiance. At Ferrari, the language has shifted. It's not "the tyres are gone," it's "I'm useless." That distinction matters. The former blames the circumstances, the latter blames the self. And when a driver blames himself often enough, confidence erodes in microseconds, the exact unit of currency that decides qualifying margins. Consider the data. Hamilton has failed to reach Q 3 times in his last 4 weekends, while Leclerc has cleared that hurdle in every one. In qualifying trim, the delta is not massive, often 2 to 3 tenths, but consistency is what builds trust inside the garage. Hamilton's inconsistency sends a different signal, that Ferrari cannot bank on him to deliver under repeatable pressure. This fragility is amplified under the scarlet spotlight. Ferrari is not Mercedes. At Brackley, Hamilton could afford an off weekend because the machinery was dominant. At Maranello, every session is dissected by Tifosi, every slip replayed until the narrative sticks. And once the narrative becomes "Hamilton makes mistakes that shouldn't happen," the pressure doubles. Here's the paradox. The same man who once built a legacy on calm brilliance in wet chaos now looks shaken by his own inner storm. And Ferrari, who signed Hamilton for his aura of composure, now face a driver whose words are magnifying doubt instead of silencing it. But the question Ferrari's leadership will soon have to ask is harsher still. Is Hamilton's self-criticism the fuel for a comeback? Or the first crack in a legend's armour that can't be repaired? On the surface, Hamilton's crash at Zandvoort looked like a beginner's error. Touch the wet white line, lose grip, and slide helplessly into the wall. But let's break that down with precision. Because at 250 kilometers per hour, nothing is simple. Zandvoort's turn 3 is banked, its asphalt camber designed to encourage multiple racing lines. But in the wet, that geometry becomes a trap. The ideal line demands crossing painted curbs and circuit markings that act like glass when damp. Hamilton knew this. He's mastered wet lines at places like Silverstone and Fuji across 2 decades. What happened here was less about ignorance, more about calculation. On a reconnaissance lap, Hamilton carried 2 kilometers per hour more entry speed than Leclerc in the same corner. 2 kilometers per hour sounds trivial. In grip-limited conditions, it's the difference between adhesion and rotation. The telemetry confirmed it. Hamilton's steering angle spiked 8 degrees the moment his front left touched paint. There was no recovery window. Once the tyre slid, the car's momentum carried him into the barriers before corrective lock could bite. In isolation, that's forgivable. A technical misjudgment under treacherous conditions. But in the broader narrative, it's ammunition for critics. Why? Because Ferrari didn't sign Hamilton to make miscalculations, they signed him to avoid them. Ralf Schumacher's "shouldn't happen" comment hinges on that expectation. A 40-year-old champion is supposed to know where the danger margins lie. Yet Hamilton's recent run, 2 spins at Zandvoort, Q2 elimination in Hungary, penalties compounding errors, suggests calculation is giving way to desperation. That perception matters as much as the data itself. Ferrari's engineers defended him quietly, noting that even Verstappen flirted with the same line. But Ferrari's board and Tifosi don't consume telemetry graphs. They consume headlines. And every headline about Hamilton's rookie mistake chisels at his aura. The technical truth is that Hamilton's margin for error has shrunk. 2 kilometers per hour too fast, a yellow flag ignored, a pit call missed. That's the razor edge where titles are lost. And Ferrari must now ask, are Hamilton's errors anomalies, or are they the start of a statistical pattern too costly to ignore? Inside Ferrari, numbers do more than tell a racing story, they decide careers. Right now, Charles Leclerc sits 42 points ahead of Hamilton, with 8 rounds remaining. That cushion does not just reflect speed, it represents reliability. Every time Leclerc clears Q3, or brings the SF25 home cleanly, he builds political equity. Every time Hamilton makes a mistake, that equity compounds. By Monza, the whispers weren't about whether Leclerc was faster. They were about whether Hamilton should still be treated as an equal partner. Ferrari's history offers a brutal precedent. From Prost and Mansell to Alonso and Massa, the Scuderia has rarely tolerated divided loyalties for long. The Tifosi amplify that tendency. Their adoration can lift a driver to myth, but it can also turn hostile in weeks. Already, social chatter after Zandvoort painted Hamilton as reckless, a superstar past his precision. If that perception sticks, even sixth-place recoveries at Monza won't shield him. Management knows this dynamic well. Fred Vasseur can insist publicly that both drivers are free to fight, but strategy sheets tell another truth. When undercut windows open, Ferrari must decide. Do they gamble on Hamilton or protect Leclerc's championship bid? Monza offered a glimpse. The missed Russell undercut looked less like hesitation, more like a quiet vote of confidence in their points leader. Hamilton himself will feel that shift. He came to Ferrari expecting not just red overalls, but red carpet treatment. Instead, he faces the same structural gravity every Ferrari recruit encounters. The Scuderia bends around its preferred sun, not its guest star. Leclerc, raised inside the system, is that sun. Hamilton risks becoming the outsider who overreached. Yet politics are never static in Maranello. A single podium, a wet weather masterclass, a decisive overtaking sequence could flip the narrative back in Hamilton's favour. But until that happens, Ferrari's pit wall is calculating every call with one eye on the championship table and one eye on the Tifosi. And here lies the real danger. The longer Hamilton goes without a podium, the easier it becomes for Ferrari to justify tilting the garage balance permanently toward Leclerc. Strip away the emotions and politics, and the numbers speak with brutal clarity. Lewis Hamilton has yet to stand on a podium in Ferrari red. 16 races in, 0 top 3 finishes. For a 7-time world champion, that statistic is not just unusual, it is unprecedented. Even in his rookie season with McLaren, Hamilton claimed 4 wins. At Mercedes, podiums were a baseline, not a bonus. In 2025, they remain a mirage. Compare that to Leclerc, 3 podiums already, plus consistent top 5 finishes. The gap, 42 points, places Hamilton 6th in the standings. To overhaul his teammate, Hamilton would need to outscore him by an average of more than 5 points per race across the final 8 rounds. In championship mathematics, that's a tall order, especially with Verstappen's Red Bull and McLaren's growing pace vacuuming up the top spots. Ferrari is realistically fighting for scraps, not crowns. This is where Ferrari's calculus becomes cold. If Leclerc is their best bet for consistent points hauls, every strategic call that favours him accelerates Hamilton's isolation. A missed undercut here, a delayed pit stop there, tiny margins, but when repeated, they accumulate into structural bias. Ferrari does not need to declare a number 1 driver outright. The championship table makes the case for them. Hamilton knows this. His insistence after Monza that he could have got 5th reflects more than frustration. It's an argument for relevance. 5th instead of 6th is not about 1 extra point. It's about slowing the drift of narrative, proving he still extracts more than the car deserves. Because if Ferrari begins to believe Leclerc can achieve the same without the errors, Hamilton's strategic rope shortens. And then there's the wider battlefield. Verstappen remains in control, the McLarens are hunting race wins, and Ferrari is caught in no man's land. Hamilton's personal duel with Leclerc is happening in a context where neither driver is realistically threatening the title, which makes perception even more vital. Ferrari must choose where to stake their pride in a lost season. The question now is simple. Can Hamilton break his podium drought before the season ends? Or will 2025 become the year his aura of inevitability finally collapses? At Ferrari, the stopwatch is only half the battle. The other half is fought in the garage, in the quiet glances between engineers, in the subtle tone of post-session debriefs. And right now, those intangibles lean toward Charles Leclerc. Watch the body language. In Monza's press pen, Leclerc projected calm, almost dismissive confidence. He spoke of maximising points, of looking ahead to Singapore. Hamilton, by contrast, was animated, frustrated, insistent that an undercut had been missed. That divergence matters. Teams absorb energy. Calm confidence reassures. Visible agitation spreads doubt. This duel isn't about raw speed. Across the last 5 qualifying sessions, the average delta between the two has been just 0.2 of a second. Statistically, that's negligible. Psychologically, it's seismic. Because in that 0.2, Leclerc has reached Q3 every time. Hamilton hasn't. Consistency beats brilliance when it comes to shaping a team's trust. Inside Ferrari, engineers crave stability. They want a driver who executes the plan, not one who questions it afterward. Hamilton, with his championship pedigree, carries the right to demand more. But every demand risks sounding like deflection when paired with unforced errors. Leclerc, meanwhile, has learned from years of Ferrari chaos how to appear stoic, even when the car disappoints. That contrast magnifies Hamilton's restlessness. This is where psychology intersects with politics. If Leclerc continues to present himself as the calm centre of Ferrari's storm, while Hamilton oscillates between self-criticism and frustration, the balance of loyalty in Maranello tilts. The Tifosi sense it too. Already, chants for Leclerc at Monza drowned out Hamilton's name. It wasn't malice, it was instinct. The homegrown driver feels like the safer bet. For Hamilton, this duel is existential. He didn't leave Mercedes to become Ferrari's number 2. Yet unless he steadies both his performances and his psychology, the role risks being decided for him. And history shows us what happens when Ferrari anoints one driver as their chosen. The other doesn't just lose races, they lose the garage. Which begs the question, is Hamilton already staring at the first signs of that shift? Lewis Hamilton is not the first legend to discover that Ferrari's scarlet overalls weigh more than they look. The Scuderia has a history of drawing greats into its orbit, only for the Tifosi's expectations to turn that gravity into burden. Think back to Alain Prost in 1991, a 3-time champion brought to Maranello to deliver glory, ended up fired after publicly criticising the car. Or Fernando Alonso, who dragged underperforming Ferraris into title fights, but eventually grew disillusioned as internal politics and missed opportunities drained him. Even Sebastian Vettel, a 4-time champion, found himself unravelling under the double strain of Leclerc's rise and Ferrari's erratic decision-making. Each story follows a familiar rhythm. Arrival with hope, flashes of brilliance, mistakes magnified, patience eroded. The Tifosi are unmatched in their passion, but that passion cuts both ways. In victory, they make you immortal. In failure, they remind you every weekend of what you are not. Hamilton entered Ferrari with the aura of a man chasing destiny. A boyhood dream fulfilled, a career-defining challenge embraced. But as Ralf Schumacher observed, mistakes that really shouldn't happen are already testing that dream. And history suggests Ferrari rarely waits long before shifting its loyalty. Yet here's where the parallel may break. Unlike Prost, Alonso, or Vettel, Hamilton has built his career on turning adversity into legacy. He was written off after 2016, only to dominate the hybrid era. He was doubted after Abu Dhabi 2021, only to mount comeback charges. If anyone has the resilience to rewrite the Ferrari script, it's him. But the clock is ticking. 8 races remain. 8 weekends to either change the perception or watch it harden into narrative. The Tifosi are patient with hope. They are ruthless with disappointment, which leaves Hamilton standing at a crossroads that every Ferrari legend has faced. Will his time in red be remembered as the rebirth of a champion, or another chapter in Maranello's long history of dreams that curdled under pressure? Lewis Hamilton's Ferrari chapter is still in its infancy, but already it carries the contradictions that define Maranello. On one hand, the raw pace is there. His Monza recovery drive proved that when the car behaves and the strategy holds, he can still carve through the midfield with authority. On the other, the mistakes are stacking up in ways that don't fit the profile of a 7-time champion. Spins at Zandvoort, missed yellow flags, Q2 eliminations, each small on its own, but together they form a narrative Ferrari cannot ignore. What makes this precarious is not the stopwatch, but the psychology and politics wrapped around it. Leclerc's consistency, Ferrari's cultural gravity toward a chosen son, and the Tifosi's unforgiving lens mean Hamilton's margin for error is thinner than at any point in his career. He has the experience to turn this around, but history shows Ferrari rarely waits for redemption. The next 8 races will decide whether Hamilton's move is remembered as destiny fulfilled or hubris exposed. If he breaks the podium drought, steadies his qualifying form and shows resilience in the storm, the Tifosi will rally behind him. If not, Ferrari may quietly shift its future around Leclerc, and Hamilton risks becoming the latest legend consumed by Maranello's paradox. So here's the dilemma that splits the paddock. Are Hamilton's recent mistakes simply the adjustment pains of a champion adapting to Ferrari's unique pressure? Or are they the early signs that the Tifosi's dream will end like Prost, Alonso and Vettel before him? Brilliant drivers undone not by speed but by the weight of red? Is this the beginning of a Ferrari redemption arc? Or the start of the sport's most painful twilight chapter?